So I encountered the same thing, put a little less eloquently. About 2 or 3 years into this, I realized that I was hamstrung and limited if I was just using our own capital. So that's when I kind of started going out and looking for outside money, a joint, people to joint venture with me, kind of bring in the money. I would find the deals.
So, are you serious about taking the next step towards owning an apartment building, raising capital? Then listen up, because I have an incredible opportunity for you. Now, I've been where you are now. When I got started, there was no guidance along this. I had to figure it all out. It took me way too long to figure it out. I didn't have clarity. I flipped houses, didn't know what direction I was going, didn't have a plan, and I didn't have any experience when I did my first deal. Now, since then, we've helped hundreds of students not only do their first deal, but become financially free. And it all started with the same step. It was a 100% free strategy session. It's a phone call. And in this call, you're going to get an easy to follow blueprint you can follow to become financially free. And most importantly on this call, which is why we call it a clarity call, really, you're going to get a lot of clarity on what's important to you in your life, and then maybe how to get there. You're going to get some guidance on tools, strategies, and direction to take on your journey. So this is, if you're ready, if you're serious about starting your journey, this is your moment. So click that link and schedule your 100% free strategy session today and take that first step towards financial freedom. Travis, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Michael. Glad to be here.
So tell me how you got into land flipping, because we all have a story. We discover these things, we have these epiphanies and ahas, and how did you get started with land flipping, and how did that turn out a strategy for you?
Well, I think similar, hopefully, to a lot of your listeners, right? Commuting, right? Commuting to work, commuting to the W-2, day job, and listening to a lot of podcasts. Big podcast fan, and just on my commute had done some, single family house investing and was listening to Bigger Pockets, kind of in search of a new angle, a new strategy, a new asset class, and heard about land and land flipping. And my dad had done some subdividing, done some stuff with land growing up. So I had a little bit of familiarity, but not as like a business model, right? As flipping. So it's something I just dove in like anything, right? You first thing comes awareness and then becomes obsession, right? And that's, I kind of became obsessed at building out essentially a six-figure second income with the goal of becoming a full-time investor.
That's awesome. So describe land flipping as a strategy. Like what's involved? How does it work?
Yeah, well, the way we approach it is I think the secret sauce or the biggest thing is off market. So for us, we're immediately going after off market vacant land properties. One, we feel like if it's off market, it's not on the MLS. There hasn't been a established value. We don't now have that listing history to deal with or anything. So we feel like we're a little late to the party with on market targeting stuff on the MLS. So we go, we pull these data sets or marketing lists, as most people think. Everything starts, right? Everything starts with property ownership records, and real estate investing. So we pull a marketing list, and direct mail is our primary channel. We do cold calling and texting, but direct mail is kind of our winner as far as signed purchase agreements. Yeah, and then we reach out to off-market landowners with unsolicited blind offers, in an effort to buy their land, at well below market value. It's essentially the kind of we buy ugly houses, approach only to land is really what it is.
I've gotten a few of those letters, Travis, probably one of yours, but they're quite probably not one of yours. But so you're making these unsolicited offers. How do you know what offer to make? I remember I flipped houses, and we had a formula where we would just come in like 25% under whatever the list price is, whatever. And so when you make these unsolicited offers, how do you know what to offer?
It's a great question, because that's actually where and why so much opportunity exists with land. Houses is much easier, right, to establish a value based on comps and assessed values, and you're right. Within a house, we don't know the custom upgrades inside the house, so we don't know that we're going to get it perfect, but there's a lot more data available for houses. So that's actually where the opportunity kind of exists for land, is that you have to understand how to value it, understand what platforms to use to pull the comps, because there's not as many. So yeah, so that comping the property out ahead of time helps us a lot. So you have two approaches. Either you just send this like generic letter of interest that expresses an interest to buy their property. And then if they respond, then we deep dive in, and that's when we value it and craft a custom offer. And I'm sure you're quite familiar with that, Michael. It's kind of the letter of interest approach, the postcard approach. Then the other approach is that blind offer approach I talk about. We're actually throw a number out there. And if we do that approach, there's a lot more work on the front end because
Right.
yes, we're row by row. We're going through and estimating value of the price per acre within that zip code, let's say, to establish our value and then base our offer on that.
All right, so you have a way to kind of value the land. You have a system for sending out direct mail, and then someone calls you in. What is the process there for negotiating that price, and then actually, do you buy it or do you legally wholesale it, or what's the actual contractual part of that?
Yeah, so typically we buy outright. We also teach this and have a number of students in our community. So there's a lot of people that come over from like house wholesaling world, and they have no interest in taking ownership and holding something for several months to get top dollar. They just say, "Hey, I just want to sign over the contract." So
Right.
wholesaling or assigning the contract is a tool in the tool belt. It is a strategy, but a lot of times we like to buy outright, capture as much equity as possible with our approach. So as the lead comes in, the first thing we do is we're trying to disqualify the property or qualify it as quickly as possible, right? Is this even worth throwing a bunch of time at? With land, there's things like road access. There's wetlands or flood zone, depending what state you're in, right? There's a slope of the property. Is it buildable? So first we try to qualify the property. And once, if it's qualified and makes it kind of through that, then we're moving on to the valuation. Yeah, to make sure that establish a value. And then like any asset class in real estate, next determining the seller's level of motivation and what kind of offer they're receptive to, right?
Now, how do you finance it? Because you said you really like to take title of it, which is the argument for wholesalers. Like, oh, I don't need any money. I can do this without any money. I live on the spread, right? And so I never wholesaled. I bought from wholesalers. And so I was the same thing. I'm going to buy this thing and add a bunch of value. And instead of making $5,000, I don't make $35,000. But of course, a lot more work, and you do require capital. How do you basically finance the purchase?
It's a great question because I think I was sharing with you before the show. I read, it was listen. I'm not going to say read. I cheated. I'm listening to the audiobook of your book, and your aha moment was almost verbatim identical to one I had in my journey. And I wrote it down here. You had said, my ability to scale this business is only limited by my ability to find deals and raise money, not my lack of financial resources, right? So I encountered the same thing, put a little less eloquently. About 2 or 3 years into this, I realized that I was hamstrung and limited if I was just using our own capital. So that's when I kind of started going out and looking for outside money, people to joint venture with me, kind of bring in the money. I would find the deals. And we started doing that early in our career. And that was kind of like pouring gas on the fire, for us to bring in outside money because we could now target these much, much larger deals that we could do on our own, right? And the number of deals we could do because we weren't waiting to recycle and bring our money back in. So yeah, the answer is first we leveraged outside money until we had made enough money by leveraging outside money that we had enough of our own, right? So at the very beginning, we self-funded everything, and it really restricted us in how quickly we could kind of scale and snowball. But then once I understood how to leverage outside money, it was a complete game changer for us. And it was a little trickier because of the asset class of land. I would give people, kind of read them my resume, give them my transactional history, and I could see their eyes light up. And then as soon as I said land, it was kind of this wah wah wah, because all these private lenders associated with single family or multifamily, once they heard land, it's a different animal, and they were unfamiliar. So it took me a while to crack that nut, but once I did, leveraging outside money and joint venturing on deals, I feel is like the fastest approach, unless you come into this thing with a war chest of money. But it's all the same. You could wholesale and assign contracts if that's your model as well.
So how do you get top dollar then? Let's look at the exit of these things. What do you do? Because you said you hold it a few months. I assume because you don't have to improve it, or maybe you do. Is there
Yeah.
improvement, or and how do you then sell for top dollar then?
Yeah, there's kind of two buckets or categories where we're either doing this with rural vacant land or we're doing it with like residential infill lots, maybe more in like a metro area, right? So kind of two different strategies where the infill lot, we might do no improvements or we might just have like some landscaping and some cleanup, right? So that the listing photos look better and get some drone videos or something. So with that, it's very little to no improvements. We like to subdivide also,
Hmm.
which when I say that, people, it sounds like a big project or it sounds like this daunting thing, but like clarifying, we like to split parcels. Okay. We don't put in sidewalks and infrastructure and roads or anything like that. Like we literally just split parcels, up. So that would be kind of our only hold time is how long does it take the surveyors to get out there and split survey the property and then get it subdivided to sell it off. But no, it's a velocity game for sure, where we're trying to, bring money back in the business as quick as possible. And later on, as we're a decade into this now, so there's more on our personal side. My wife and I, there's a lot more like we'll buy and hold. If we find one or we subdivide some, it's kind of becomes a buy one get one free when you subdivide. But the business model itself is very much built on on velocity and little to no improvements.
It reminds me of, I think, something that was in Rich Dad Poor Dad, where Kiyosaki bought like a 100-acre tract and sold off like 5 acres and
Yeah.
basically used that money to pay for the 95 that he essentially got for free. And I was like, ha, that's freaking brilliant. Uh,
That's
I love.
exactly. We'll do things like that where we take a large parcel, we'll split it down the middle and sell off half cash to get our money back, and then split the other half up into three or four much smaller
Yeah.
parcels, and then sell those off one at a time.
Now you mentioned infrastructure, right? The next level, I think, from what I know about land in value add is actually creating. So you're already subdividing, so you're adding some amount of value to because you're doing that.
Yeah.
But the next step probably would be infrastructure, and if so, have you considered it? And if not, why is that something that you don't want to get into?
Well, what we've found is that builders and developers, we prefer to source it to them and allow them to stay in the deal longer. It might be a 15 to 18 months period for them, right? For us personally, we'd much rather make, several small bets, right? And kind of spread our money out than we would put it all in one project. Because as we know, if it takes 2 years to do a development or a project, not timestamp in this episode, but as we know, markets shift, things change, right? So there's a little bit of risk associated with staying in a deal too long, right? So for us, our preference is to kind of keep it simple and have these relationships where we're sourcing the land to the developers and to the builders. But we're leaving enough meat on the bone to source it to them, but not stay in it and develop it ourselves, just because it ties up so much capital on one project. There's not
Yeah,
a right or a wrong. It's just with our model, that's our preference.
yeah, you're obviously very intentional about that because you are getting into now essentially development, and so
Yeah.
the risk goes up, and it ties up more capital, and so you're focused more on you're really focused, which is the right thing to do. Now, one of the things I found that you read in my book is I could not really figure out how to rehab houses and turn it into a financial freedom vehicle. Now, I know you talk about financial freedom,
Yeah.
and in your world, how does land flipping, how can that create financial freedom?
Yeah, well, there's a number of different approaches, but one would be like Either we can focus on big cash flips to kind of just pile up cash, right? Or we could essentially, what I would say, like buy time, meaning like we buy ourselves time that much of this land, especially the rural vacant land, there's this incredibly huge market that is familiar with and used to buying land on payments or seller financing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
unimproved land is a really good candidate to sell with seller financing and on payments. So that's kind of an approach we'll do where like we have a 40 acre in northern Arizona, for example, that it's a 15-year note that we created, right? So we're going to be collecting payments for 15 years plus the interest income on that. So a number of people will approach this with buying the property. The key is we capture equity when we buy. As you know, like having flipped some houses and stuff, right? Generally you might get a little bit of a deal because it's an ugly house, but really the sweat equity is the value add. For us, we're capturing equity at the time of purchase, which really, really insulates us from risk. But if we capture equity on the purchase, and we sell this with seller financing, so we add that interest income on top of it, right? The math pencils out pretty good. So this is how early on actually was my initial approach to leave the job, being a husband and dad with kids. I couldn't be a cowboy, or a maverick with just quitting the job and trying to go full time. I really had to build something that I knew I had enough runway when I left. So that's what we did. We built the business up by selling these properties off via seller financing. And we
Mm-hmm.
created enough notes that the monthly income was 10,000, at the time, 10,000 a month was as big as I could think. It felt huge at the time. In hindsight, I chuckle because as your mindset changes, as your business grows, your mindset grows, right? But at the beginning, 10,000 a month was that big magic number. And we got there and I was able to quit my job. We had that recurring income from notes. So kind of the long answer is really like with notes or seller financing, you can create a situation where you're getting pretty passive income. You have a third party note servicer. The beauty is you don't have repairs, you don't have maintenance tickets because it's vacant land. So usually it's not occupied, so there's not much maintenance with it. So, but I'm still not a fan of the total passive, but it's pretty passive income. The main thing is it's recurring. So you create the situation as far as the financial freedom where when we did that, and I left my job, the first thing I did was we took a month-long vacation because I knew those payments are coming in, right? I knew those payments were coming in. So a lot of people will leverage seller financing to create that kind of financial freedom and essentially buy themselves time, knowing that they have 5, 10, 15 years worth of note income coming in after they've done all that work on the front end.
And you're right that with single family houses that was not really a repeatable scale model. You could sell a lease option or you can have tenants in there, but that's more of a rental portfolio. And so
Yeah.
creating notes, that's very interesting. Now, how can you still do that when you're actually raising money for land purchase? Do you wrap it around, or how do you structure? Do you pass that 15-year note on to the investor, or what does the return look like for the investor?
Yeah, well, a lot of times for us, we're buying land, and it's hard for people to wrap their head around. But we typically buy land for 35 to 50% of its value. With like an infill lot in a metro area, we might come up to 60%. We might pay a lot higher, but we really only take the slam dunks and layups. So we run the business super conservative. And I would rather spend more on marketing to find a better deal than I would make a deal work, and buy too much deeper. So for us, yeah, like we're generally not paying over, 50%. And a lot of times we're paying a little less. So that initial down payment we ask for, we try to get almost all of our money back. When we resell through agents and on the MLS, and it's just kind of par for the course to ask 30 to 50% down when
Mm-hmm.
people buy, right? That's what the banks want on land. We ask the same. We give them a little bit better interest rate than the banks. But we're usually getting most of our money back when we resell it with that down payment because again, we've we've only bought it for 30 to 50%. So the beauty of that is we're not upside down too long in the note. Usually within 12 to 18 months of the note, we're flush, right? But yeah, you can have that potential, like you're saying, though, if you're buying too deep, and you're not getting a large enough down payment. This was an education I had early on. We kind of found ourselves dirt rich and note rich, but cash poor, right? Where we had created all these notes, but we weren't, you know what I mean? We weren't liquid. We had everything was trapped in notes. So you got to have a balance. We kind of have this happy balance of cash sales and seller finance sales so that we're always bringing money back in. Otherwise, you cap out at how many of those you can buy outright and sell on payments.
I gotcha. So, okay, I see how that works with when you get a deposit, you actually pay you and your investor back when you buy the land, and so you're basically creating a note from essentially what the equity is. That's pretty cool. Now,
Yeah.
I'm curious about your last day of work. Like, what was that like?
So the funny thing was I remember having some extension or browser extension or some web app that you plugged in a date and it was like a countdown backwards, right? So I remember like having this date that was several months out of like, okay, I'm going to quit at this time, right? And I remember kind of every day I go into my workstation and looking at that date and being like, okay, we're getting closer. And that's kind of what gave me hope and got me continue to go there. We built it in such a way that it was like all of our payments or like our contracts were, using like Zapier, right? We had automations for the web forms for the contracts to be filled out, to be docu-signed, and then the payments were auto drafted, right, with QuickBooks. So the reality was I kind of got the business running so smooth by the time I hit the date, you're like, it felt silly. Why would I quit? Like I'm not working as hard as I was the first couple of years because there was a couple of years of overlap. So I had to convince myself. So I'm like, maybe I'll stick around a while. So I actually stayed probably 6 months longer than I need to. And then I just had one of those moments in a meeting where I'm like, okay, time to time to pack up. So for me, it was a situation where, yeah, I got up midday, grabbed my stuff, walked out, and was just done. And that, yeah, it was a beautiful day, right? It was a beautiful day.
What did your coworkers say? Your friends, like, were they like, what was their reaction?
It was kind of a office space moment where about 3 days later a manager had called and it said, hey, are what's going on, are you coming back? And you
No.
just no, we had built this thing up with the intention of going full time, yeah, and finally got there. And then I probably took the foot off the gas for the first year I was full time. And I think that was just kind of recharge and spend a lot of family time after years of clocking a lot of hours. But after about 10 months or a year, I got re-energized to, have another surge and grow the business again, after taking a little well-deserved break, I guess.
So it sounds like you kind of stayed in your job for probably longer than, well, you could have left earlier. So
Yeah.
realistically, you're working with a number of people as well. Like, how
Yeah.
long does it take realistically to generate whatever $7,000-10,000 per month?
Yeah, well, I approach it different with clients now with the beauty of hindsight, right? Where I wouldn't actually have people follow my path.
Me too. Me too. I'm like the crash test dummy of like apparently everything. So
don't you
uh,
feel like, yeah, you have a better
yeah,
way? You say like, learn from my
absolutely.
mistakes, don't repeat them. So I have a much better, more deliberate plan for people. And it's usually like customized to their situation. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Because you'll have some individuals that are happy, with their job and their profession. They just want to scratch that itch outside the day job or build up kind of a second stream of income. So their plan looks a little different than the person that says, hey, this job's soul crushing, get me out of it as quick as I can. So we'll kind of build a customized plan, but usually I just very much just start with their what they need annually and work backwards. And we generally say, how are we going to collect that in what increments, right? Are we going to do one or two really big flips a year? Or are we going to try to break this up so we're doing one a month and you get that over 12 flips?
Mhm.
So that's usually where I start is, what fits you and how much time do you have to input in the business? Because you're really only limited by your inputs, right? So if somebody says, hey, I can only throw 10 hours a week at this, it looks a little different, for the dad of four that's strapped for time and only can give the business 10 hours a week than the single guy who says, hey man, I'll throw 35 hours a week at this, right? They have all that extra time. So for them, we can build a different plan. So yeah, it's very customized. I try to build it very customized and intentional, knowing that not everybody has the same amount of time, and also knowing, being a dad, I have three boys, all three boys are in two sports. So, I understand those time limitations. So I might help somebody build their business model a little differently than the single guy who's got nothing but time to throw at the business. But typically within a year, I feel like you can get that income replaced. And then I'm a fan of overlap. I really am, of rather than somebody leaving too early and having to return to the workforce. I would prefer to kind of, embrace that suck and, endure as much overlap as you can. Well, you kind of stack as much cash as you can on the side, because when you become an entrepreneur, it's a change when it's a side hustle and it's a second income versus when it's your primary income and you're cannibalizing the business, paying yourself, right? It's a different ball game. So I like people to have more set aside than they need, whether it's kind of mountains of cash or streams of recurring note income. I would prefer that people build it up beyond what they think they need before they quit their job.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see when people quit. Some people burn the boats before they even got started, and then other people stay in their job way too long. And it's interesting just kind of seeing. You're right. There's not a single size fits all. I want to talk to you about threats and opportunities. We're obviously in interesting, challenging times, and a lot of people are struggling. And there's also a lot of people argue a lot of opportunity. Where do you see the threats in land flipping, and then where do you see the opportunities?
Well, I feel like the most immediate threat to not just land, but almost all real estate investors is interest rates. Interest rates just have such a significant impact on everybody's, behavior, right? And buying and activity. So for us, like some of our infill lots, we were riding a really high wave, when people were buying lots and builders were building, or people were building a second home. When the interest rate was low enough, they could get a construction loan immediately, right? When rates went up, the builders obviously pumped their brakes, if not paused totally. Okay. So that slowed down our kind of infill lot flipping side of the business. And what we did at that time is we kind of leaned into the rural vacant land and the seller financing. And the silver lining of rates going up is when you're the lender, you're the bank, right? We're originating notes. People were beating us up on interest rates the last 3, 4, 5 years, right? Well, all of a sudden, when rates go up and you're the one originating notes, it means instead of getting 8.9%, you're now getting 10.9 or 11.9 on the notes you create, right? So for us right now, it is a really good time for us to originate notes, with the current interest rate, and lean more in to the rural vacant land, because it's kind of more sustainable and less volatile. The residential infill lots are very cyclical, and tied to the interest rates in the home building industry. So for us, we don't do one or the other, because when you're all in on one, you can be real vulnerable. That's kind of the threat. So we look at it like having two different products, in our business, and depending on what the market's doing, we lean more into one, than the other. Opportunities. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity with subdividing. You hinted on developing, things like that. The larger projects, and that most individuals that are familiar with land or land flipping kind of come in through a guru, through a $97 course or something, right? Most people are kind of immediately starting out with the very, very cheap stuff, meaning like auction lots, you know what I'm saying? Like, Michael, like $10,000, $20,000 properties. So a lot of the activity is at a very low price point. The opportunity, and this is when we got outside money and we could start going after more expensive stuff, we realized these individuals received way less direct mail, way less calls, texts, letters. So we realized there's actually opportunity at a higher value. And the way it was initially presented to us was that this is kind of an inefficient market at the below 30,000 price point, because no agents want to take a land listing worth $20,000. There's not enough commission. So that's the way it was presented to us, and that's the way that worked for us because we had limited means. But when we started bringing in outside capital and going after 150, $250,000, lots, we realized that land was an inefficient market at almost every level. We even realized that having investors in our network who do this model with ranches, meaning like a couple $1 million ranches in Texas. You might buy for under market value and then subdivide and sell off as ranchettes. So that really opened my eyes to realize that there's opportunity in land as an efficient market, at not just the 3,000 price point, 30,000, 300,000, but up to the 3 million, meaning just there's a lot of opportunity if you have enough capital, and enough experience to take down and willing to take the risk to go after bigger deals. There's a lot of opportunity in the bigger deals, and it's a space that not a lot of investors are playing in. So I think that's where our next opportunity is as we shift is just, less transactions per year, bigger projects, more revenue per transaction, maybe working with more outside capital versus using our own capital. I think that's where the opportunity is for us personally.
Travis, how can people connect with you and learn more about what you're doing with the land flips?
TravisKing.com is probably the easiest. Probably the one-stop shop. From there, you can see our different training programs we have. Got a lot of respect for what you're doing with your book. Whenever you read somebody's book, you consume it and you think, oh, that was a good book, but you have no idea the work that goes into getting that book launched, right? I've been working for about 2.5 years, Michael, and finally got thelandinvestorsplaybook.com. So the Land Investors Playbook I've been writing for a couple of years, and kind of went the conventional route. This was all before AI emerged and you could write a book in a weekend. So much like you, did it the hard way, the conventional way. So pretty excited about that coming out as well. But TravisKing.com is the easiest place to get familiar with me, I'd say.
Well, it's fascinating to pick your brain about a different strategy to become financially free, and I love it. Thanks for being so transparent with your strategy. So, really enjoyed chatting with you, Travis.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'll tell people is it's not a standalone strategy. I have investors that pair this with like BRRRR, the BRRRR model, single family, or like multifamily, where this model spits off cash, but it doesn't have those tax advantages like multifamily, right? And depreciation and stuff like that. So sometimes pairing those things, right? Where you've got a business generating a lot of cash over here and you can push it into this other business over there. There's a lot of synergy where a lot of marketers, they'll try to kind of pit houses versus land or multifamily versus this. There's actually every asset sits on land, right? So there's a lot of synergy generally when you pair the two.
Love it, Travis. Thanks for being on the show.
All right. Appreciate you, Michael. Thanks.